"You're the no sex for fish girl." I was at a club event and these two kids come up to me and they kind of go, "You're the no sex for fish girl." I remember being really like offended and shocked and honestly kind of confused. My roommate who was standing next to me kind of turns to me and goes, "Oh my god, they're talking about your presentation." Oh, they're actually not insulting me. I realized that they were actually talking about a presentation that I had given earlier about the No Sex for Fish initiative in Kenya. So let's talk about the women who gave me the notorious reputation I have today. Fishing is actually a gendered industry in Kenya, meaning a lot of the men will actually go out to sea, do that physical fishing, and then they'll bring back their catch of the day and they'll sell it to women. And women are the ones who end up selling the fishes in the markets. They would take advantage of women. They would basically tell the women in this village that we will give you our catch of the day, but you have to have sex with us. Something to note about this particular village in Kenya is that a lot of people in this village are actually living with HIV, and many of the community members are actually orphans or single mothers trying to keep their families afloat. A lot of women felt helpless. They didn't want to partake in the sex, but they really had no other choice. They needed to feed their families. One day, a Peace Corps personnel was actually walking along the beach and he stopped to talk to some of the women, and he asked some of the women why they were waiting around for the fishermen to come back. And that's when one of the women, her name is Justine, kind of explained to him what was happening, and they told the Peace Corps member that if we owned the boats, if the fishermen answered to us, we would be the bosses and we'd kind of flip the power dynamic and they no longer would be able to exploit us. So that's exactly what the Peace Corps volunteer and Justine did. They kind of worked together to get grants and funding. Now the women would rent out these boats to the men, letting them use them for the day, and then when they'd come back, they would take a portion of the men's catch. This went on for a little bit, but eventually it just wasn't sustainable. A lot of the boats ended up deteriorating. A lot of the women actually ended up giving up. The actions of the No Sex for Fish women were not born in a vacuum. The lake's fish population began dwindling in the early 70s because of overfishing and environmental problems. Extreme weather events and the climate crisis often lead to short and long-term migration, which has been associated with poverty and increased engagement in transactional sex and sexual exploitation.
The relationship between climate change and sexual and reproductive health may not be obvious, but it is increasingly critical, especially for young people who face unique vulnerabilities. Young people must be empowered to advocate for integrated climate and sexual rights policies that address their specific needs and ensure sustainable futures. Similarly to how Justine worked with her community, it's imperative that policymakers, healthcare providers, and youth leaders collaborate on innovative solutions that protect and promote the rights of young people in the face of climate change.
There's definitely a few lessons that I like to keep with me from Justine's story, but the number one lesson that I take away is hope. Justine was actually incredibly hopeful, and she's even quoted in the article saying that when you have hope, you can get. Her hope is actually what created a sustainable solution. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the women actually ended up losing hope. They ended up giving up, the boats ended up deteriorating, but Justine was hopeful that she would not go back to being sexually exploited. A lot of times conversations surrounding climate crisis, sexual rights, reproductive rights are very gloom and doom, but if Justine can remain hopeful, so can we.